Okay, so we're back here on the Movies by McManus podcast. Had a little bit of a break before for some stuff we had to take care of, but we wanted to just now that we've kind of shared some of our thoughts on the findings and everything that's happened since Friday, we wanted to jump into this bail application and just go over some of the information as it relates to why they zeroed in on this Rex Heuermann. Now it's called a bail application, which makes it almost sound like Rex is requesting bail. But what it really is like I said, it just outlines kind of basically the evidence they have against him. So we're going to kind of go through this document here. You can kind of see it up on your screen. We'll put an image of it for now, and basically it starts off just listing the indictments. And as we've pointed out, this does not include Maureen Brainerd Barnes in the indictment yet, but they refer to her throughout the indictment, and they make it very clear that they anticipate charging Rex with that indictment. So we have murder in the first degree for all Melissa, Megan, and Amber. We have murder in the second degree also for all of Melissa, Megan, and Amber. Um, and then just reading from the document here, as described below, based on the serious, heinous nature of these serial murders, the planning and forethought that went into these crimes, the strength of the people's case, the length of incarceration the defendant faces upon conviction, the extended period of time that this defendant was able to avoid apprehension, his recent searches for sadistic materials, child pornography, images of the victims and their relatives, counter surveillance conducted online as to the criminal investigation, his use of fictitious names, burner email, and cell phone accounts, and his access to and history of possessing firearms, the only means to ensure defendant Rex A. Heuermann's return to court is to remand him without bail. What's interesting about that off the bat is the fact that they took him down. They arrested him in Manhattan at his office as opposed to at the home. We now know at least partially that reason was because of this arsenal of guns. He had 92 licenses for guns, I believe, but he had over 200 guns. So I guess they were, protecting against a potential Waco situation or something.
Right, that would have been insane in Massapequa to have done something like that. Um, yeah, crazy. I mean, from hearing um that he was purchasing burner phones, that he kind of had this stockpile. One with the burner phones, it kind of leads me to believe that um he had no intention of stopping killing altogether. That's what I see from that. Of maybe he didn't, maybe he hasn't killed anyone since 2010, but the idea was definitely still there, and there at least some preparation to at some point start to commit murders again. With the guns, it's an interesting point of like, do you think that the reason he was stockpiling guns was in case the police would come and arrest him to his house? Like, do you think that maybe this was part of the plan, or do you think, he's just a crazy person, and crazy people have a lot of guns? Or do you think like he literally did have an idea in his head of like, if the police come, to have a Waco situation, a standoff with the police?
I mean, I can't. This is a person of some intelligence,
Yeah.
clearly, with his career as an architect and a consultant. I can't imagine a scenario where anyone, whatever narcissism they may have, is going to think that, no matter how many guns they have in their possession, they're going to be able to, take on the forces like that. But who knows? I mean, one thing that was pointed out was he was a duck hunter, apparently, which maybe would explain some of the firearms. Not that it's necessarily a bad thing just to have firearms if they're registered and that's what you're into.
Yeah.
But the point being, about the burlap, what's come out now is that the burlap was not your traditional burlap, where they kind of thought it was like what you'd find at a nursery or something like that, but it was really duck blinds. In other words, camouflage that you would put on yourself to camouflage yourself when you're hunting, and he was a duck hunter. So that's, I mean, the guy had a lot of guns.
I mean,
I
yeah, and
guess.
that was like that was one of the main like points that a lot of the internet people talking about this case was kind of was specified the burlap, because it's not something that you can get everywhere, you know. When we originally thought it was burlap as in like a potato sack or something like that, that's not
Right.
something every person has access to. And it's kind of just more like of how the public wasn't properly informed of everything. But and I also don't know if that had something to do with the investigation. Like maybe they purposely were putting some misinformation out there to try to weed out false claims or anything like that. I've heard of police purposely putting out misinformation to try to weed out like false red herrings and all things like that.
Yeah, that's certainly a tactic. I wouldn't attribute any sort of you know, gamesmanship to SCPD, especially early on. I think they were really just disorganized, and
Yeah.
but I could be wrong. All right, moving on here. Uh, Now we have basically in the indictment, or in the bail application, some description of the discovery of the victims. Which, if you're familiar with the case, you're aware of most of this. On December 11th, 2010, police officer John Malia was conducting a training exercise with his canine partner Blue along Ocean Parkway in Gilgo Beach. During the course of the exercise, Blue, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not paraphrasing, I'm just cutting some words. Blue located a set of remains later identified to be Melissa Bartholomew. 2 days later, three additional sets of human remains were within 1/4 mile of the first discovery, and they show a little graphic here. The cause of death for all four women was determined to be homicidal violence. So, uh, this is information that we know. One thing that is interesting here is they say the investigations into these deaths were linked. In addition to other factors, the victims each appeared to have been placed in close proximity to one another, 22 to 33 feet from the edge of the parkway. All were petite females, 22 to 27, believed to be working as sex workers. All had been killed by homicide, and all had contact shortly before their disappearances with a person using a burner cell phone, i.e., cell phones without an associated verified identity. And the cell phones of two of the four victims, Brainerd Barnes and Bartholomew, were used by the killer after their deaths. He was checking their voicemails. Also, with Melissa, he was taunting the sister, and we'll get to that. In addition, each of the four victims were found similarly positioned, bound in a similar fashion by either belts or tape, with three of the victims found wrapped in a burlap type material. So three were in burlap, one was not. That's new information. Um, and I believe that they're saying that Melissa was bound by belts and the other three were bound by tape. I want to point out one interesting note here in the bail application regarding Maureen Brainerd Barnes, who was the first to go missing, not the first to be discovered, the first to go missing back in 2007. It says, although the defendant is not yet charged with any crimes to the disappearance and murder of Miss Brainerd Barnes, as set forth below, defendant Rex A. Heuermann is the prime suspect in her death and the investigation, which is continuing and is expected to be resolved soon. Moreover, there is substantial evidence of defendant Heuermann's involvement in the disappearance and death of Miss Brainerd Barnes, which evidence closely fits the modus operandi of the defendant in relation to the deaths of the other 3 women, and which supports the current charges. As such, this bail application contains descriptions of that evidence, which demonstrates the strength of the people's case as currently charged. Simply put, they would not make reference, countless reference to Maureen if they didn't know that he was involved.
No, 100%. And like, I don't think there's anyone who, seriously thinks he's not involved in her death. I mean, I think that the idea that he killed 3 and not the 4th is utterly ridiculous. So,
Absolutely.
it's a matter of days until he's charged with that killing as well. Going back to the cell phones, one of like the interesting parts of before we knew who Rex was, before all of this, when we were just kind of looking into the case, the cell phones were always interesting because one, he called one of the victims sister. He used racial slurs against her. So he knew his victims enough to know she had a sister who was mixed race. And I believe one of the victims didn't bring her cell phone with her. So that was another thing of like, he at least knew the victims enough, or there is at least like a little bit of trust there that she was willing to meet him without her cell phone, because that's something extremely rare for a sex worker to do. To go and visit somebody without a cell phone, without some way of contacting someone else who's going to, come in and protect you if you need to, is extremely rare. So he must have like developed some sort of relationship with the victims beforehand. I mean, I don't just, to know that information about her and, to develop some sort of trust. I just always found that interesting.
Yeah, and one thing in the bail application that we'll get to relating to Amber Lynn Costello, who is the one. Originally, it was thought that Megan Waterman left her phone in the Hop Hog Hotel. That turns out to have not been true. Amber Lynn Costello did leave her phone home, but to your point, it is now confirmed that Rex saw Amber Lynn Costello 2 nights in a row. The first night in the home, he entered the home. He was involved in a ruse where Amber's basically partner, not sexual partner, but business partner, would pretend to be her boyfriend, walking in on her, performing, in the midst of sex work with a client, to scare the client to leave after the client had paid. So it's basically a ripoff scheme. And they did that on Rex, and we'll get into that. So getting back to now the recent investigation. In January 2022, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office assigned an experienced team of investigators, analysts, and prosecutors to work jointly with law enforcement partners from the Suffolk County Police Department, New York State Police, Suffolk County Sheriff's Office, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Okay, so now it looks like Nassau County wasn't involved in the task force. At least it's saying here.
Hmm.
A comprehensive review of every item of evidence and information in this investigation was undertaken by the team. Love that. On March 14th, look at the dates, people. Look at the dates. January 2022, March 2022. That's after 2010, discovery of the first bodies, up to 2022. If we're getting the math completely straight, that's 11 years and 1 month, because I believe it's December 2010.
Yeah.
But look at what they did in 2 months' time. I believe even Ray Tierney said 6 weeks. So, okay. On March 14th, 2022, approximately 2 months into the renewed joint investigation, this comprehensive review led to the discovery of a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche that was registered to defendant Rex A. Heuermann at the time of these murders. As described below, this was significant because a witness to the disappearance of Amber Costello identified a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche as the vehicle believed to have been driven by her killer. Okay, so March 14th, for some reason in their investigation into the original evidence, they're picking up on this Chevrolet Avalanche, and they're saying that, wait, at the time, someone very significant who was Dave Schaller, which was Amber's roommate and business partner in the sex work, described this Chevrolet Avalanche. So to me, we had this information since 2010.
Yeah.
I mean, where would they get new information about a Chevrolet Avalanche? So that to me
Especially
is
with when you said that they had ran this scam on Rex the night before. It's just like so mind-boggling that he wasn't a suspect earlier. It's so crazy to me that
right.
he wasn't a suspect in 2011 in
I mean,
that just seems
you,
ridiculous.
you're saying that because they said the first thing they did was to look at every piece of evidence, and once they did that, they discovered this interesting thing about the Chevy Avalanche. So why didn't anyone discover that years ago? I don't know if there's a good answer to that. If there is, I don't really see it in this document. Um, so okay, this discovery, picking up on the Avalanche and picking up that there was a witness describing a witness to the disappearance of Amber Costello identified a first generation Chevrolet Avalanche as the vehicle believed to have been driven by her killer. This discovery led to a comprehensive. So now they have Rex's name and now they have his car. So they say, now we need to take a look at this guy further. This discovery led to a comprehensive investigation of defendant Heuermann, which consisted of over 300 subpoenas, search warrants, and other legal processes to obtain evidence. As discussed more fully below, among the items uncovered, okay, here we go. Cell phone billing records for defendant Heuermann corresponding to cell locations for the burner cell phones used to arrange meetings with 3 of the 4 victims. I mean, boom. 2, the taunting calls made to a relative of Miss Bartholomew. That's her younger sister. 3, a call made by a detective to Miss Bartholomew's cell phone while looking into her disappearance. And 4, calls checking voicemail on Miss Brainerd Barnes' cell phone after her disappearance. In addition, Heuermann lived in Massapequa Park, where the victims were believed to have disappeared from, and he worked in Midtown Manhattan in the vicinity where the taunting calls were made to the sister of Miss Bartholomew. As set forth more fully below, defendant Rex A. Heuermann is believed to be the person who used the burner cell phones to communicate with each of the 4 victims prior to their disappearance, and who used Miss Brainerd Barnes' cell phone and Miss Bartholomew's cell phone after their death. deaths. Both defendant Heuermann and these burner cell phones had significant connections to both Midtown Manhattan and Massapequa Park, New York. Um, Look, you talk about a revelation. I mean, obviously being able to look at, gets the subpoena power to look at the cell phone records that are putting him in these places. But again, these are, you have to imagine we could have found these cell phone records back then. They're not
Yeah,
new cell phone records.
yeah.
It's a new way of looking into the cell phone records. So maybe Suffolk County, they didn't have the power to pull these records. But again, um, we had always known about Midtown Manhattan and we had always known about Massapequa Park. So the question remains, why did it take so long to pull these records?
Well, it doesn't. What's interesting is that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of new there's a lot of new evidence. It seems like the only difference is for the first time people are looking at the old evidence. Besides the belt, the engraved belt, there's really no new evidence that the police have. They literally had all of this from the beginning. Um,
Or at least the capability, you would think,
yeah,
to find it.
yeah,
Whether they had it or not, or they just didn't, because maybe, I believe I've read 1,000 things on this since Friday, so forgive me if I'm mixing things up. But I believe that there was some, the subpoena power, and Ray Tierney talked about the power of the grand jury to issue the subpoenas. So perhaps when Suffolk County, when James Burke and those guys were just keeping it in house, you know, they didn't have the power and they didn't have clearly the desire. Um, so now it's going to get into a little bit of the disappearance of each of the women. Um, and it's so fascinating, right? Because we've heard these stories over and over and over and over again in different documentaries, different podcasts, different books. Um, but now we have it from the actual police who have never really shared this much
yeah.
detail before. Um, Maureen Brainerd Barnes was last seen on July 9th, 2007 in New York City, at the time working as a sex worker. Her cell phone was contacted by a burner cell phone. Between July 6th and July 9th, there were 16 interactions between this burner phone and Brainerd Barnes' cell phone. He's talking to her 16 interactions in 3 days. Wow. On July 9th, the last cell site location for the Brainerd Barnes cell phone was approximately 1156 in Midtown Manhattan near the 59th Street Bridge. That's new information. Everyone had always said it was Penn Station. So now we're saying the 59th Street Bridge. She did tell her sister she was at Penn Station. So I'm not sure what the 59th Street Bridge is about. Thereafter, the Brainerd Barnes cell phone had no further activity until July 12th, 2007, 3 days after her disappearance. 2 outbound calls were made from her cell phone, checking her voicemail from a site location near the Long Island Expressway in Islandia. The disappearance and murder of Melissa Bartholomew. Melissa Bartholomew was last seen on July 10th, 2009 in New York City, believed to be working as a sex worker. On July 3rd, 2009, she was contacted by a burner cell phone. She was contacted by this burner cell phone on July 6th, July 9th, and July 10th, which was the last day she was seen alive. On July 10th, 2009, cell site records indicate the burner cell phone traveled from Massapequa Park to Midtown Manhattan. Later that evening, the Bartholomew cell phone traveled from Midtown Manhattan to Massapequa, with the last cell site location being in Massapequa on July 11th, 2009, at approximately 1:43 a.m. Bartholomew's cell phone was used to make an outbound call, checking her voicemail from a cell site in Freeport. 2 more checks to the voicemail. Okay, now here we go. Now remember, the last the last day she was seen alive is July 10th. Okay. July 17th, 23rd, August 5th, August 19th, and August 26th, the Bartholomew phone made taunting phone calls to family members, some of which resulted in a conversation between the caller, who was a male and a relative of Melissa Bartholomew, in which the male caller admitted killing and sexually assaulting Miss Bartholomew. As described below, cell site locations of the phone during these taunting calls were all in Midtown Manhattan. So there you go. There are your Midtown Manhattan calls that we have heard so much about for so many years, confirmed via cell phone records and linked to Rex Heuermann. Amazing.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, the story's not over. But it's good to at least like have some clarity and some justice, really, for these girls. During this entire time, I keep thinking about when this case first came out. I was younger than every one of the victims, and now I'm older than every one of them. And I keep thinking about the fact that, like, I'm 30 now, and none of these victims ever got to reach that age. And it's upsetting to think about. If you learn about, especially, and like, I encourage everybody watching to read the book Lost Girls. If you read about the life of these women, none of them were ever given a fair shot. They had to do, what they had to do to survive, and then to end in a way of, like, by this man who just thought he had the right to take that away from somebody, um and there's just like so much life that they didn't get to live, and to hear about like the last moments, the final days, it's so upsetting. I just it's such a disgusting world, you know. I it's these women had so little, and he even had to take that away. Oh,
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there's evil monsters that roam this earth that don't necessarily look like it, and we can't tell, but it's some pretty sick shit, and I appreciate you taking the time there to kind of reflect on what this is all about, which is the victims. And guys, if you want to read the full bail application, it's you could just Google bail application Rex Heuermann. A number of different sources have it. We obviously spent time on Melissa and Maureen. We're not going to go through the entire document because it's 32 pages long, but basically with Megan Waterman, you have the same story, contacted by a burner cell phone just activated that day. She's captured on video surveillance exiting the Holiday Inn. Following that, the burner cell phone had no further phone activity. However, cell records show that the Waterman phone traveled to Massapequa Park at approximately 3:11 in the vicinity of the residence of defendant Heuermann. So, I mean, either something happened, or and he traveled back with her phone, or she traveled back with him and was murdered at the residence, which is unbelievable. Again, in our hometown.
yeah.
Now moving to Amber, last seen alive on September 2nd. Now, on September 1st, the day prior, her cell phone was contacted by a burner. during the communications, the cell phone connected to cell towers in West Amityville and Massapequa Park. Thereafter, the burner cell phone traveled to West Babylon, which is where Amber lived. According to witnesses, around the time of these communications, a client showed up at Ms. Costello's residence in West Babylon. After the client entered the home, a ruse was executed on the client whereby a person pretended to be the outraged boyfriend of Amber Costello, and the client left the residence. While Amber retained the money the client had brought to pay for her services. Based upon interviews, the client was described as a large white male, approximately 6'4" to 6'6" in height, in his mid-40s, which Rex would have been at the time, with dark bushy hair and big oval-style 70s glasses. A witness described him to police as appearing like an ogre, I think.
That's accurate. Yeah, we've seen pictures of him. That's accurate.
Right. Furthermore, here we go. A witness noticed a first-generation Chevy Avalanche parked in the driveway of the residence. Okay. At 1:18 in the morning on now September 2nd, after the ruse had been perpetrated, the burner cell phone sent a text message to Costello, which stated, "That was not so nice," and asking for a credit for the next time. Phone records show that the burner phone was located in Massapequa Park within 2 minutes of this text message being sent. Next day, again, Costello is contacted by the same client that was in the house the night before with the avalanche. Approximately 9:32, the same burner cell phone from the previous evening communicated with the Costello phone. During this communication, the burner cell phone used a cell site location in Midtown Manhattan. The burner cell phone then traveled to Massapequa Park and had contacts with the Costello phone at 10:39 and 11:05 p.m. Records show the burner phone at approximately 11:17 traveled to West Babylon in proximity of the Amber Costello residence. Okay, here we go. Subsequently, Amber Costello left her own cell phone behind, walked out the front door of the residence, and was seen alive for the last time. Shortly after Costello left the house, a witness observed a dark-colored truck pass the house, specifically coming from the direction Amber had walked towards. I think that's an important detail, because the Chevy Avalanche was seen in the driveway the night before. The night after, he sees a dark truck. So it's obviously the same vehicle, but if we're getting real specific about it, he didn't technically see the avalanche that night, unless I'm getting something wrong. Okay. Now, again, we're gonna spend a little more time on the evidence just because it's so groundbreaking. So let's just look at this. I guess you could call this circumstantial, but significantly, here we go. Records established that defendant Heuermann's wife was out of New York for the disappearances of Bartholomew, Waterman, and Costello. Amazing. Basically, the records show she was in Iceland, and she was in Maryland, and she was in New Jersey during those times. Then it goes into showing, how his address was in Massapequa and his business was in Manhattan. Regarding Brainerd Barnes, neither cellular telephone billing records nor travel/financial records could be obtained for Heuermann's wife for 2007. Basically, those records don't exist anymore, so that's the only reason they can't determine whether she was traveling during Maureen's death as well.
Gotcha.
And then it's really breaking it down even further. For example, on July 10th, the last day Bartholomew was seen alive, the burner phone and defendant Heuermann's phone were in the area of Massapequa and traveled together towards New York City. Thereafter, Bartholomew's phone and Heuermann's phone traveled eastbound toward Massapequa. So you basically have no point in time where Rex and the burner are not together, and you have periods of time where, the women's phone, the burner, and Rex's phone are all together. And guys, if you want to go into further detail, it's amazing, this document, how it maps out quite literally with maps, the times and locations of these calls. I mean, they really did a phenomenal job breaking this all down. I'm not going to try to, to butcher it any further, but it's well worth, a deep dive here. I mean, they have this guy just completely dead to rights here.
Yeah.
Now this is some pretty dark stuff, but legal process. Now we're talking about his computer records. Legal process served on Google seeking records or accounts associated with the device identifiers of these additional burner cell phones revealed a connection to yet another burner or junk email account, namely Thok, the Thok email account. It's Thok080672 at Gmail. Google records further indicate that the Thok email account was subscribed to the fictitious name Thomas Hawk. A search warrant revealed that the Thok email account associated with burner cell phone 347, and then it gives a name, was used to conduct thousands of searches related to sex workers, sadistic, torture-related pornography, and child pornography. So including Mistress Long Island, mature escorts Manhattan, girl begging for rape porn, teen girl begging for rape porn, pretty girl with bruised face porn, torture redhead porn, 10-year-old schoolgirl, hentai plump pussy lips cut off porn, skinny redhead tied up porn, short fat girl tied up. So you get the point here, guys.
I don't know if we have to go further on that. I think we get the point.
One thing, number 12 on the search here, Asian twink tied up porn. Why would an Asian twink be of significance?
One of the victims. Yes, one of the victims, Asian male, was possibly transgender or a drag queen, I believe they were originally saying, was one of the victims.
Exactly, Asian male. So could it be a coincidence? Perhaps. This is the only, this is the only inclination we've got. And we know he's a pedophile. We know he's a sick bastard. We know he's a horrible human being. We know that he's into petite women. We know that he's into torture. This is the first indication that we now know he has this fetish of Asian twinks. Again, one of the victims is an Asian transgender male. At least that's theorized. It's not theorized that he's Asian, but that remains to be seen. I mean, look, again, we're dealing with the Gilgo 4 here. I hope in pretty short order we could get an answer now that we have his DNA on if we could connect him to some of these other victims, or if he's going to be excluded. But the Asian twink thing is very, very interesting for that reason.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that was one of the searches, and that makes that puts a connection to the other 7 murders that we, at least somewhat, that we didn't really have before. There's an interesting thing because the reason why people thought that there was 2 different killers is because the MO of the 4 victims was so different than the other 7. And something that's brought up in the killing season is there's this theory that serial killers don't change their MO. And you're saying that's not true, that serial killers do change their MO, and that it's not at all out of the realm of possibilities that this was all done by the same person. Um, one thing that I want to bring up, um, one person who really hasn't been talked about at all during, at least by the media, is Shannon Gilbert. Because now with this new information, it seems as though Shannon Gilbert was most likely not murdered by Rex Heuermann. Most likely. It doesn't fit. She went missing in Oak Beach near Gilgo Beach, and that wasn't where he was abducting his victims from. And it seems like, because I mean, Shannon, she is and she isn't one of the victims where, you know, she probably was not murdered by this man, but in a way, she's a victim of the same system that all these women were victims to. She's a victim to the same system that takes poor, low income young girls and then puts them into a situation where they have to do terrible, where they have to do degrading things to survive, and then eventually they die tragically. I don't know if you have any thoughts of what of Shannon, like in this whole situation, of if you think that her death is connected or anything like that.
I think the way that you described it is accurate, which is, basically she's connected, but she's not connected. Do I think that Rex Heuermann killed Shannon Gilbert on the night of May 1st, 2010? No, I don't. Do I think that Shannon was murdered that night? I lean towards probably not, but I'm not 100% sure. Could she have been
No,
murdered that night? Would I be surprised? No, I wouldn't be surprised.
it's
Um,
definitely the circumstances around her death are still suspicious, to say the least.
yes,
You
yes,
know,
100%.
I'm somewhat in the middle. I'd say I'd lean more towards I believe she was murdered. Um, eh, but but I don't know.
There's no good explanation of why
Yeah.
she died that night.
And that's really why I lean more towards um that she was murdered, simply for the fact of that what you just said, there is no good explanation of what happened to her unless someone was there who took her life.
Yeah,
That's how I feel about it.
they talked about hypothermia. I mean, that was ruled out because of the temperature.
Yeah.
They talked about drugs. They didn't really find drugs in her system. They talked about, a psychotic break. Okay, maybe, but does that kill you necessarily? Like,
Yeah.
like the first night you have a psychotic break? I don't know. I don't know enough about that.
And she was
Um,
so far, she was found so far into the bushes, into the marsh, of how did she get there? I unless
right.
somebody put her there, someone who did not want her to be found.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
they also brought up drowning, but then that was ruled out because there wasn't,
Yeah.
where she was found was basically perched onto some brush, from what I understand. And that, she wasn't face down in water or
Yeah.
anything. And even if she was, there wasn't that much water on the ground anyway. So there's never been a good explanation for why she died that night. There just isn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
That being said, who killed her? That's a whole nother episode. I I mean, they looked at they looked at Michael Pack, they looked at Joe Brewer, they looked at Dr. Hackett, they looked at James Burke, I'm sure. I'm sure they took a look at John Bittroff, who's sitting behind prison. Um, uh, there's no good suspect either.
Yeah, no, exactly.
You know, that boy, I mean, I would love an answer on what happened there. By the
Yeah,
way, and again, like hats off to Rodney Harrison. He gets in there, boom. You know, the Megan Waterman Hop Hog Hotel video comes out, the Shannon Gilbert phone call comes out. We didn't learn a single fucking thing from that phone call.
yeah, no, exactly.
We didn't learn a single thing. What we learned on that phone call was exactly what we knew for 12 years, which is, you know, I would even go so far as to say, I mean, you hear Joe Brewer and and Michael Pack almost jokingly being like, Shannon, what the fuck are you talking about? Like you guys are trying to kill me. They're like, yeah, you could almost see them looking at each other like, dude, what the fuck is she saying? Like,
Yeah.
you know, like, do I think they killed her? Nah, I not really. I really don't see that. But again, there's too many. But again, without Shannon Gilbert, none of this happens. I mean, you know, they claim in this bail document that, you know, John Malia had his canine out there when they were running exercises. You've also heard that they were looking for Shannon Gilbert. So were they running exercises? Were they actively looking for Shannon? The fact of the matter is, without Shannon Gilbert and the attention that it brought to that area, um, you know, I don't think that we'd be where we are today. I just don't. I don't buy that it was training exercises. You know, I
And
don't.
and that is one of the
Was it training exercises in the hope of finding Shannon? Because they've
yeah,
you always heard that they were looking for Shannon, which is why they stumbled on the other bodies. They don't mention that in this document.
that is one of like the hard parts of this is while we know what happened to the Gilgo 4 girls, um we don't know what happened to Shannon. And this whole started this entire story, this entire case started to find this girl, to find Shannon Gilbert because no one knew what happened to her. Um it's an it and the tragedy of like the Gilbert family, of her mother going down there to Suffolk County to force the police to do something about her missing daughter, and it leads to four other girls who were murdered, their killer being brought to justice, but nothing happened for Shannon. And not only did nothing happen for Shannon, but the mother isn't even here for this.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly. The mother tragically being murdered by the other sister
yes,
who was for sure mentally ill. I mean,
yes.
there's some debate out there of whether Shannon had some mental illness, but um,
It's it's the way we treat young poor girls. It's
right.
the way we treat low income families in general in this country. Of you're forced to, go into sex work or do things that, degrading or whatever, or whatever term you want to use, but you have to do these things to survive. Society shames you for these, and then they think nothing of you when something dangerous happens to you. Um, and
Before we
again, it's just like, you know, it's not lost on me the fact that it's just like we get to be here and they don't. You know, uh, I don't know.
Before we wrap, I do think it's important that we just kind of conclude the findings of this document
Right.
quickly. Um, this Thok email account that was responsible for those heinous searches also was used to conduct in excess of 200 searches between March 2022 and June 2023. June 2023, people, a month ago,
Yeah.
related to active and known serial killers, the specific disappearances and murders of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, and the investigation into their murders. These searches or articles, I mean, this is a month ago, guys. We got the fucking killer researching the
Yeah.
case a month ago. Okay, so here are the searches. Why could law enforcement not trace calls but not trace calls made by the Long Island serial killer? Why hasn't the Long Island serial killer been caught? Long Island serial killer, Long Island serial killer phone call, Long Island serial killer update. Uh, I'll just kind of skip around here. John Bitroff, interesting.
Yeah. Very interesting.
A suspect in some of the Manorville cases, some of the Long Island serial killer cases, a longtime suspect, also behind bars for two murders that he committed, suspected in a third murder of murdering sex workers on Long Island. Um, Here's what's interesting about this to me. So John Bitroff, Megan Waterman, Melissa Bartholomew, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, cops launch. Then he was looking up some relatives of Melissa and Megan. Cops launch Gilgo Beach Homicide Investigation Task Force, mapping the Long Island serial killer murder victims. Okay. Long Island serial killer investigation, new technology may be key to break in case. Um, so here's what's interesting to me. He's researching specifically the Gilgo 4.
Yeah.
Does this mean that he's only responsible for the Gilgo 4? He's not researching any of the other victims,
He's
but he's
not take
researching
yeah.
he's researching the Gilgo 4 and he's researching John Bitroff. So
Yeah.
is he just responsible for the Gilgo 4? Like a lot of people assume that the Gilgo 4 killer was their own person, not related to the other cases. And is he researching John Bitroff because he thinks, I wonder if this guy is the other killer?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why wouldn't he be looking? He's clearly interested in this case and looking his own crimes up. Why wouldn't he be looking up the other crimes? Why would he just be looking up those four girls if he did commit the other crimes?
No, that's 100%. Um, the girl who was found in Manorville.
Well, there's two. There's Jessica Taylor and Valerie
Yes.
Mack. They were
Okay.
both found in Manorville and on Ocean Parkway.
Okay. Yeah, no, that neither of those names came up. I mean, um, if it wasn't for, I mean, the public knows those two names, so like, if it wasn't for that, my only thought would be maybe he didn't know the victims' names.
Just
Oh.
like didn't even maybe never knew them or
Maybe never
had
knew
known
their
them
names,
or
how do
didn't.
we, and it's these four girls, we don't know if they used a fake name with him also, you know, or whatever. I mean, the idea that he just didn't know the names of the victims, I'd say would have been an explanation for that, except we know two of the Manorville victims
Exactly.
by name.
That's the problem with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
Um, my gut reaction to that is that Rex Heuermann didn't kill the rest of them.
right.
I could be wrong. I could absolutely be wrong, but that's my gut reaction. My gut reaction, if he killed the other people,
But
unless,
here's also a thing.
yeah,
We don't know if this is all of his searches. It's possible they only put in things that are relevant to this case. He could have
That is an
been
excellent
searching
point.
the other ones. And then the police, since it's not related to this, the police are withholding it.
That's an excellent point. And maybe they're going to wait to indict some of the other ones, and then there's going to be more searches released that
Yeah.
show that he was searching. The only one that confuses me is why would they include John Bitroff's name in this?
Yeah, I don't know. Um,
Okay, let's wrap this up here, but
yeah,
we gotta get to some of the DNA.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I mean, it's guys, we keep saying we're gonna wrap this up. It's so fascinating, this document. You got to look at it.
yeah.
The account was used to search for a number of podcasts and documentaries.
That I saw too.
He
I
might have
had a
watched
few
this
friends
show.
that sent that to me.
He might have watched this show.
Oh God, I
Um,
hope not. Oh,
yeah.
I don't want to like think of that fucking creep looking at
Well,
me.
well, wait a sec. Well, how about this, dude? I mean,
I don't.
he got kicked out of Whole Foods in Massapequa for stealing clementines.
I
So
don't.
forget watching the show. We were probably, like, statistically speaking, there's a high probability we were in the same building or the same room as this guy at one point in time over the last 30 years in Massapequa.
Yeah, it makes me feel like gross to even think about. You know.
That is a far less than zero probability.
Yeah.
All right. So um let's get into some of the evidence. I mean, they have so much on the cell phones, guys. You really got to see this. They have images of him purchasing minutes on his burner phone. They have him looking at the official Google News site. All right, here we go, guys. DNA analysis of hairs recovered from the examination of the victims' bodies. During the course of this investigation, each of the 4 victims' bodies were examined by a forensic scientist with the Suffolk County Crime Laboratory, which revealed as follows. Maureen had been restrained by 3 leather belts. During the examination of the belts, a female hair was recovered from the buckle. Although this hair was not suitable for nuclear DNA profiling at the time, it was subsequently submitted for further DNA analysis. Megan Waterman had been bound by clear or white duct tape. During the examination of her body, 2 female hairs were recovered from outside the head area and around the head area. An examination of the body of Miss Amber Costello revealed that she'd been bound by 3 pieces of clear or white duct tape. During the course of the examination, a female hair was recovered. So we have three bodies, female hair on each of the bodies. So they basically find that all 3 of those female hairs belong to what they call a mitochondrial haplogroup K1C2. They then recover. They basically, they go through your trash once they zoom in on you. They recovered bottles from their trash, the Heuermann's trash. They did DNA profiling on the bottles. They were able to conclude that the DNA profiles generated from the bottles indicated a female individual belonging to mitochondrial haplogroup K1C2. So, female in Heuermann's home matches the mitochondrial DNA on the bodies. Then we have they have it down to 99.98% of the North American population could be excluded, but the wife could not be excluded. Now we have, and guys, it's way more in depth than that. Again, I would suggest you read through it. Then we have male hair linked to defendant Heuermann. During the initial examination of Miss Waterman's skeletal remains. Okay, so there's a male hair found on Megan Waterman. The male hair was from the bottom of the burlap. An initial examination revealed Caucasian European characteristics. At the time, DNA analysis was unsuitable. The hair was subsequently submitted for further DNA analysis on or about July 31st, 2020, so only 3 years ago. They determined that it was in the male mitochondrial haplogroup V7A, following the discovery of the Chevrolet Avalanche, which was registered to defendant Heuermann, and the investigation of cellular billing records and other items. The surveillance team, basically, they knew they had their guy, and now let's go smoke them with the DNA. So on or about January 26, 2023, a surveillance team observed and recovered a pizza box thrown by Rex Heuermann into a garbage can located basically in front of his office. And they have a picture here. The pizza box was sent to Suffolk County Crime Laboratory for analysis, where a swab was taken. On or about March 23rd, 2023, the laboratory sent the swab of the pizza crust to the laboratory. On April 28th, 2023, a detective hand-delivered from the forensic laboratory the male hair on Waterman for testing. June 12th, guys, look how recent. June 12th, forensic laboratory was able to determine that the male hair and the swab on the pizza crust, the mitochondrial DNA profiles are the same, specifically at a rate that would exclude 99.96% of the North American population, except for Heuermann. So Heuermann cannot be excluded from the male hair recovered near the bottom of the burlap. Then it gets into the arrest and search of Heuermann, and that is basically the entirety of the bail application. So, pretty amazing how much they have on him, and I don't think there's any question that this is certainly the guy responsible for the Gilgo 4. We'll see when that indictment's going to come down on Maureen, and we'll just remain. We'll see what happens with the rest of these sets of remains now that they have him behind bars. Hopefully, again, they could either quickly determine that he is in fact involved in other murders, or quickly determine that he's not. I know that they're also now looking into South Carolina and Las Vegas. So once you're in that database, they should be able to make those determinations.
And hopefully we'll have all the answers we need. The families will have all the answers they need. Doesn't bring anybody back, but it hopefully provides some closure. It hopefully prevents him from killing anybody else. Well, not hopefully, it will. And that's the important part of making sure that he doesn't do it to anybody else. That's kind of the tragedy of this taking so long, of who knows what he was doing in those 13 years. And that's kind of the thought I keep having of James Burke and his boys were so preoccupied with their own thing, and they let this guy do whatever he wanted for 13 years when they had this information and they had all this evidence, and they could have captured him back then. And
well,
look, if he had killed someone in the past 13 years, they share part of the blame. you know.
Absolutely. And, I just want to point out again that, it's not, the James Burke has been gone for a long time. So as aggressively James Burke um, thwarted the investigation, uh, next further administrations beyond James Burke didn't do enough. So
Yeah.
you either were
Yes.
obstructing or you didn't do enough. Um, it took 12 years to put this task force together, and they were able to basically close the case in 6 weeks. So, you know, we will have to wait and see how the rest of this plays out. Um, but what a week it's been.
Yeah.
Not even a week, and we'll see how this shakes out.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and I hope that there aren't other victims, and I hope that there aren't. But if there are, then there's a lot of people to blame. That's the fact of the matter. Um, and it's really someone should have cared for these girls while they were alive. And that's part of the problem too. Um, but yeah, those are my final words on this. I don't know if you have any final words to wrap this up.
I mean, I agree that, we hope there are no other victims. On the other hand, I find it really hard to believe that a person of this caliber searching for those search terms, doing what he was doing, I find it really difficult to believe that for whatever reason, for a really brief period of time from 2007 to 2010, this guy said, "You know what? I want to try out this whole murderer thing for 3 years."
Yeah.
But before that, no. After that, no. Let me test it out for 3 years. What's the likelihood that that's the case?
No. Yeah. No, you make a good point with that. Um, okay. So this has been our kind of impromptu podcast. We're getting it together quickly just because like we been bombarded with so much information, so much has happened, and we just wanted to get something to you guys quickly. We'll be back in the studio soon. Um, Follow us on if you like this video. We mostly do movies reviews on this channel. So if you like this and you want to subscribe to our channel, check us out on social media at Movies by McManus on Instagram, TikTok, on Spotify, and I'm your host Greg, as always, my brother Mike, and Rex Heuermann, Rotten Hell. And that's what I would like to end that on. And have a good night.